Committee of the Whole is called back to order. Colleagues, were good discussion about the amendment to the amendment. And they were asked that we make some changes to the amendment to the amendment. So, to wrap it up and put closure to this, Senator Shelton, let's close this up and then we can decide on if this is acceptable to our colleagues.
Situus Masi, Mr. Chair, there has been an amendment that's been passed out. I want to thank the Speaker for her consideration of this amendment, her help to work this out. We've provided a new amendment for everyone just to clean things up, and so it's going to strike out letter A, keep letter B, still keep the change of fiscal year 2023 to 2022, and then for it to read, the Opioid Recovery Advisory Council shall submit annually a detailed spending plan for the Opioid Recovery Trust Fund for fiscal year 2022 and every subsequent fiscal year to the Speaker of the Legislature in Guam, no later than August 1st each year.
Excuse me, Senator Shelton. Just to make it clear for legal issues, withdraw first your amendment and then this amendment, and everybody's heard it, and we can just wrap it up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, withdraw first of the first amendment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I make a motion to withdraw my previous amendment, my amendment now. Please,
Okay.
I'd like to withdraw it.
There's a motion to withdraw the amendment to the amendment. Are there any objection? There being none, now your amendment to the amendment, Senator Shelton.
Thank you. For it to read, the Opioid Recovery Advisory Council shall submit annually a detailed spending plan for the Opioid Recovery Trust Fund for the fiscal year 2022 and 2023 and every subsequent fiscal year to the Speaker of the Legislature in Guam no later than August 1st of each year.
My colleagues, you might have to write it in, the 2023 part. All right? It's every year, so it's automatic, yeah. It's redundant, but it's okay. Anyone who would like to speak to this amendment? Madam Speaker, please.
Yes, I'd like to thank the sponsor for this amendment to the amendment. What it does is we're trying to get by August 1st, in advance of the October 1st fiscal year, the plan for these funds. So it's supposed to be, and I'm hoping legal, if I could add to that, to ask legal to help make any technical changes necessary. So by putting fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 2023 no later than August 1st, that's because for this upcoming summer, we're going to spend fiscal year 2022 and we're going to submit a plan, hopefully, for fiscal year 2023 at the same time. That's why the 2 years I think makes sense, and I want to thank the author. And I'd like to add that legal be allowed to make any technical changes necessary to promote the intent of this amendment.
All right, thank you, Madam Speaker. Does anyone else like to speak to this? Because just a reminder, colleagues, Senator Perez brought up that issue earlier. She wanted to make sure that it was reflective of every year and that it reflects the year and there's no conflict there. Does anyone else like to speak? Senator Tello.
I just some clarification, Mr. Chair. Because when the author of this amendment to the amendment was reading that by adding 20, and then she strikes out 3 and puts 22, and then mentioned again and 2023, right?
That's correct.
Okay, this is the part that we just insert.
Need to write in, and the only reason why is because it's
23.
the Speaker.
And every year after.
That's correct.
And 20, okay, so there is. So it would be not a comma, it would be and 2023 and every year after. So there's and instead of a comma. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, and legal will make the technical corrections to make sure that it flows. And everybody, please read it when it comes out in gross. What's that? What's that, Chris? I'm here. Anyone else like to speak to this? Senator Paris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment to the amendment, and I thank the proffer of addressing the concern that I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Paris. I don't see any other hands. Do you want to speak to this? Are there any objection to the amendment to the amendment? There being none, amendment passes to the amendment. Now back to Speaker to the amendment as amended. Madam Speaker, would you like to speak or close? Are there any objection to the amendment as amended? There being none, so ordered. Colleagues, this closes Bill 204. All right? Senator Shelton, your final words for this bill. So we can
Thank you
move to the
very
next
much, Mr. Chair. And I would like to also thank the Attorney General, Leven Camacho, Deputy Attorney General Stephanie Mendiola, Chief Deputy Attorney General Shannon Titano, and Assistant Attorney General Joseph Perez for their work on behalf of the people of Guam and their assistance on this bill. And Mr. Chair, we have an opportunity here to prepare for the arrival of these funds from this opioid settlement, and an even better opportunity to designate the people who are most knowledgeable and most affected by opioid addiction to determine how these funds should be spent to address substance abuse disorders on our island. Mr. Chair, I want to thank all of our colleagues for their participation in the markup of this bill today. And I think this bill calls for the Office of the Attorney General to transmit to the legislature reports on any activity. We just passed this amendment for an annual spending plan. It also provides for the Office of the Public Accountability to perform annual audits. And so we have set in place transparency measures to ensure that we are spending this money to the best of our ability to serve the people of Guam. And so, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank everyone again for their work, and I look forward to seeing this money, that we're expecting over $10 million over the next 18 years in settlement funds, to see this money put to work to expand access to prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery options, and for that all to be decided on by a council that is composed of our experts working on the front lines and experiencing these realities in our community. And so I urge my colleagues, for the health of our community, for the betterment of our community, to strengthen the future of our island, to right the wrongs of substance abuse that so many of our people have struggled with, so many families have suffered from, and to prevent any future damage of these substance abuse disorders in the future, for their support of this act. So Dios Masi, Mr. Chair.
Senator Shelton, would you
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
move that the bill?
Yes, I'd like to move that we rise.
Not yet. Senator Shelton.
Assiduous Mossy, Mr. Chair, I move that Bill Number 204-36 LS, as amended by the Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriations, and Housing, and further amended in the Committee of the Whole, with the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole to be placed on the third reading file.
Thank you, Madam Senator Shelton. A motion that it be placed on third reading file with the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole. Hearing no, are there any objection? Hearing no objection, motion carries. My colleagues, we are now on Bill 206. What was that? They're asking for a recess. Let's take a few minutes recess. Thank you. Colleagues, the Committee of the Whole is called back to order. We are now at Bill 206. The following individuals that were invited are the OFB office, can you call them in, and the CFO for the legislature, because we're talking about funds from the legislature.
Mr. Chair?
Yes?
Chair, Mr. Chair, understandable that the bill that we just recently went through, grueling, amendments and everything that transpired today, because of your request to ensure that all amendments be provided to the clerks in time. Knowing this was going to take clearly after 5:30 now, we don't have the opportunity at this time to put our amendments through now. It was just we were so busy on the previous bill, 204. So I asked Mr. Chair that we recess until tomorrow morning to address these bills, the remaining bills. And I'm sure, Mr. Chair, it's not going to be as long as the previous bill, but it gives us the opportunity to at least provide our amendments to the clerk, ahead of time, like you requested on the other bill.
Understood.
So I'm asking you to make a motion that we recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
I understand your request for recess. That was brought up to the speaker, and she asked that we complete the bill, 2 bills tonight, because she expects that the bill 214 will be tomorrow, and it's going to take all day.
Mr. Chair.
And she wants to make sure that we meet the time period to vote before the state funeral. And I'm obliging to that, unless you want to make a motion.
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chair.
And then it's up to the body to.
So it allows us the opportunity to provide like you said, have our amendments ahead of time to provide to the clerk so it'll run real smooth. And I believe the next 2 bills are not going to be as contentious. So I ask that we resume until tomorrow at 9 a.m. Considering, Mr. Chair, we've got 2 individuals who are not here right now. We've got 2 who are off island. And it behooves me why we continue on with this with not that many senators in the House while we're debating on important measures.
Well, Senator Adams on his way. I just spoke to him. He's en route back. And Senator Clinton is probably at the hospital with his father. Okay. And the other 2 that are off island are for medical reasons.
Well, it still begs me to ask for this recess so we can provide any kind of amendments for any of the bills that are coming up. We've been taking our time on 204, so I make the motion that we recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning and start fresh on these bills.
All right, Senator Nelson. I mean, it's really non-debatable, but
I'll make the amendment to make it 7 p.m. this evening.
that we end at 7 p.m. and then finish off of amendments tomorrow. I mean, I'm not too sure what.
We should at least start moving, Mr. Chair. I don't have any qualms staying late. We don't have to end till 10. We could continue on. We should at least try to continue on, at least start the introductory discussions on these bills, because we all know who takes a large part of the thing, and so be it, a large part of the time, but that's fine. That everyone has that right to do so. But let's continue on, because we know that tomorrow is going to be another issue, and it's going to be a whole day, and we're not going to rush. I'm going to object if we try rushing our clerks and our legal to meet a certain timeline for someone else's expectations.
Understood.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
just
Chair.
for sake of conversation.
Yes, Senator Duenas.
Yeah, I mean, we did have a holiday this week, and we did postpone this session, so because of another issue beyond our control, declaration of another holiday on Black Friday. I propose, I agree with not rushing, but I propose we consider extending session through Monday, Mr. Chairman, and to properly debate these bills if this is what the road we're going to go down.
Mr. Chair,
Madam Speaker.
I would just like to remind the body that during the Committee on Rules meeting, this timeline was discussed, and it was very clear that if we run out of time on Friday, we are going to cut the agenda at that point. And so I'm trying to make sure that in order to accommodate everybody's bills, we've been trying to be very efficient getting the bills through, and that's why I am proposing that we allocate all day tomorrow for that final bill, and if we can, finish these bills. If we need time for amendments, then I say we take a recess and get time for amendments, but I still say that we allocate the entire day tomorrow, try to finish that final bill, and give the clerks the weekend, Monday and Tuesday, to engross the bills. And we can stay on our schedule, we can have our state funeral, and we can stick to what we've discussed in the Committee on Rules meetings as well.
All right. Senator Brown. And then we're going to go ahead and, Senator Brown?
You know, Mr. Chairman, I'm pretty much at every session. I don't think I've missed a session yet since the term started. I pretty much attend probably 90% of the public hearings, including the one that occurred the other night when there were only 4 members of this body participating. We had session all day, and we had almost a 5-hour hearing till 10:45. You know, I appreciate the fact of wanting to get all these bills through, but I think today in particular, I just don't want to keep running on and on because we're trying to meet timelines, and if we don't get it done, then we don't get it done. Unless there's something so critically urgent to the people of Guam that we need to do it, then by all means we should. But I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation that we should be able to go over these bills and get the amendments and get the proper debate on them. We're rushing to timelines for whose schedule? And I'm here. You tell me one day I haven't missed session. I don't miss morning sessions and stroll in the afternoon. I don't stay here and not be here for days on end and just stroll in to vote like some of our colleagues here do. And we're not here debating my bills. I've had one bill this entire term. I can't even get another bill reported out of your committee. So I think I've been here accommodating pretty much every member here. And I just think right now at this moment, I think we should come back tomorrow morning and continue debate in all fairness. If we get done, we get done. If we don't and the clock is up, then it's up. But I think to do all this juggling is a bit unfair for those of us that actually are participating on a consistent basis here at the Guam Legislature. And trust me, there's only a small percentage of senators that can make that claim. And I'm one of them. And I'm making it. So I would prefer we come back tomorrow morning so that we can properly debate these bills as we should. Thank you.
Senator Tello, you have a...
Thank you. I'd like to amend my motion, Mr. Chair. You know, I'd like to amend it to 8 o'clock tomorrow morning instead of 9 o'clock, like everyone else that gets in their car to drive to work. Let's start at 8 o'clock in the morning to get these 2 bills, which I think won't take very long, and if everybody have the opportunity to put their amendments in beforehand, like you've suggested, Mr. Chair, I think that will run a lot smoother. So I'd just like to make an amendment that we come in at 8 a.m. instead of 9 to address these other 2 bills and you know, start on time.
Okay. There's an amendment to continue till 7 p.m. Okay? It's only an hour from now.
Mr. Chair, to clarify, the amendment was not to continue. The amendment was to
Come in at 7?
reconvene at 7.
We can come in at 4 in the morning. I have no
Mr.
problem.
Chair,
I'm awake.
let's,
But
I would have been
7
through my,
PM
I would have been
tonight.
through my opening statement 10 minutes ago if we just proceeded. We're ready to proceed, let's go.
okay,
We had a nice 2-hour lunch, let's go.
3 hours. You know, folks, let me make it very clear. If we need to stay until 10, I have no problem. I only missed one session because I was in the States. I would not have missed any session. And every hearing that's happened, I've watched every one of them on my phone or my computer. So for time use, I don't see any reason why we can't continue. Senator Adams is back. I'm still trying to reach Senator Clint, and I will continue reaching him until we get a hold of him, and then we come up with a reasonable time. The Speaker has no problem that we stay on as long as possible. I don't see any reason why we need to stop right now. All right? So with that note, we will begin with 206, and then we measure it from there as far as we can reasonably go. I know that Senator Chris would like to come back tomorrow morning, but he's willing to continue on tonight.
No, I'm ready to roll, sir.
All right, so let's continue, colleagues. It's 2:06.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I think you need to
Yes.
call a vote on the motion.
All right, let's make a call on the motion. All in favor of recessing now?
Recessing until 8 a.m. tomorrow.
No, let's start with the recessing now first, because there was a time we started with, so okay. All in favor of recessing now? Then we'll determine the time, it'll be 8 o'clock or 7.
Mr.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if you could just check with the clerks. I think that motion was amended.
Recess until 7? All right, colleagues. I don't think I need a gavel. I didn't mean gavel recess. From legal advice, the first amendment was to recess until 7 p.m. and then start back up. Correct? All in favor of that motion first. Then we're going to go to yours. Yes, Nate, but we have to work on yours, Nate, first. Okay? Because yours is to continue until recess at 7 p.m. and then start back up and then finish off Bill 206 and hopefully even Bill 66. Okay? The motion is to recess until 7 p.m. And in other words, recess for 1 hour and then start back up. That's basically what it is. All in favor, please raise either hand, right or left. The recess until 7 p.m. and then come back in at 7 p.m. and continue on with session. Okay, so if you can raise your hand, I'll know how many votes we got. How many? 1, 2, 3. That motion fails. Okay, now we're going to go back to Senator Tellos. Your request is that we recess until 8 a.m. tomorrow. I prefer to just continue on, but there's an amendment. There's all kinds of amendments. And it has to be discussed. Okay? It's to... And I understand where you come from, Senators. We need to settle this. I believe we just need to settle 206. All in favor of recessing until 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Motion fails. Colleagues, end of discussion. We will continue now with Bill 206. I'll ask Sergeant Arms to please swear in first. The OFB representative, Ms. Vanessa, and Agnes Cruz from the CFO from Central Faust.
Mr.
Please.
Chair, where's public health?
Hold on. Okay, Ms. Vanessa was ready sworn in. Ms. Agnes Cruz, if you please stand and testify. Or be sworn in.
Please raise your right hand. Under penalty of perjury, do you affirm that any and all information that you provide today, whether it be verbally, electronically, and in writing, be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Mr. Chair, you're under oath. You may proceed.
Thank you. The question you asked, Senator Tello, is where's public health? If you read the bill, it's about $1,000 being appropriated, taken from an... Let me read the bill. An act to require the promulgation and publication of the interim rules, so forth, okay? Agency by the Department of Public Health and Social Service to ensure transparency, permit public participation, and to provide a method of making such rules readily accessible to the public, and to further appropriate $1,000 from the unexpended funds of the Office of Senator Mary Camacho Torres of the Legislature in Guam to the Department of Public Health and Social Service for this purpose. We are on the committee of the whole because of money. It's not about any other agencies. That's the only reason why I get involved in it. Otherwise, the Speaker would have been the oversight for public health. So we're going to move on with this, with our opening statement, and we're going to declare and then move on with the bill. Unless there's really I don't see how anybody needs to be here other than the money person. We're talking about her funds.
Mr. Chair, I have to object because if we're talking, if we have public health here, if they really need the $1,000, I mean, this is an appropriations bill. Where is the agency and where it's supposed to go to? Do they really need this money? These are questions that we need to ask. I mean, if we went down this path to put this bill through an appropriations bill, then we should follow the same rules of engagement when it comes in the committee of the whole. That's all I'm saying, Mr. Chair.
If we follow the committee's report, if I'm correct, Public Health participated on the hearing. Am I correct? I
You're
mean,
correct.
right, let's call a spade a spade.
Well, so did
It
the
was
AG's
discussed.
office.
The AG was brought in to testify about the contracts for the opioid. Nobody else.
Yeah, I object, Mr. Chair, as well. I'd like
And
to
you
reg-
object.
Yeah, that we are proceeding differently with this bill than with all the other bills when we went into committee of the whole.
Mr. Chair, point of
And Torres,
information.
the author of the bill?
Point of information. This is an appropriation bill. We are attesting to the funds that are coming from the source, which is the legislature. So the people that are impaneled are the correct people to answer to that. As far as any issues with public health, they have supported this bill unanimously, including testimony in the committee report regarding the funding. So may we please just proceed with the bill? These are the rules of engagement, and we followed it. I don't see any deviation from that. And I object to public health being here anyways. This is the appropriate panel for the funds that are being attested to.
Mr. Chair, I object. There's no rule that says this is the appropriate panel. That's absolutely false. When we brought in the Attorney General's office, they were not an appropriation person at that point. It was an advisory council who's going to spend the money. We weren't even appropriating money to them. We were telling the advisory council they're going to get to appropriate the money. Not the Attorney General, but they were the only ones that came in because they were the subject matter experts. And this is not primarily an appropriation bill. It's primarily a public health rules and regulations bill. They're going to promulgate rules and regulations for adoptions. And I very much object to the classification of this bill as primarily an appropriations bill. It's very minimally an appropriations bill, as I pointed out during the Committee on Rules meeting and in letters prior to that. It is primarily a bill to authorize public health to promulgate rules and regulations regarding the licensing of adoption agencies.
Take a quick recess.
Mr. Chair,
Quick, I'm gonna get with legal, okay? Committee of the Whole is called back to order. We will continue to proceed with Bill 206. Please, my colleagues, understand. The bill was referred to me, Committee on Appropriation. The bill was referred to the Committee of the Whole, that I oversee. Any other bill before that, I didn't ask for the bill. It was referred to me by the Committee on Rules. This bill has been referred to me because of an appropriation, and we're going to move on that.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we call in public health.
I've heard already an objection from senators when you were commenting that earlier, so we're going to move on.
No, Mr. Chair, my motion was not addressed. I'm making
All
a
right,
motion
you're
to call
making a
public
motion.
health.
Okay. All in favor of that motion to call in public health? Because I'm going to rule against it. 1, 2, 3. Motion fails. All right? Senator Torres, please begin with your opening statement on your bill, 206. Thank you.
Situas Mossy, Mr. Chair. Bill 206 establishes a fair and transparent rulemaking process for the licensing of all child placement agencies in Guam, which would include adoption agencies. Under this bill, public health must draft interim rules within 6 months upon enactment. The interim rules must then receive a public hearing and upon approval will remain effective for 1 year or until the promulgation of final rules pursuant to the administrative adjudication law. Mr. Chair, Bill 206 garnered unanimous support from health officials and community partners at its public hearing, including Acting CPS Director Lonnie Brennan, Deputy Public Health Director Terry Uggan, and Harvest House Director Bethany Taylor. But before delving into what made this bill so unanimously favored, I'd like to take a moment to address some misstatements that have led us down the path we find ourselves on today. It's been said that we need these rules and regulations to correct the sins of previous bills passed by this body, bills that received overwhelming bipartisan support, both on and off this floor, from 10 senators, the administration, and the Republican Party of Guam. Some have belittled that achievement and called it political. But I believe the simplest explanation is almost always the best one, that others saw bills 108 and 109 to be sound, reasonable, and necessary. Why? Because the bills acknowledged that children in our foster care system can remain in limbo for years in some cases. Because the bills recognize that to find each of them a stable, loving home, we need effective adoption services in addition to strong social services. And because ultimately the decision to insert adoption agencies into the process was balanced by the control and oversight of public health. Under Bills 108 and 109, which are now Public Laws 3639 and 3640, only the adoption agency contacted by public health could place a relinquished infant in a home, and those homes must be pre-approved by public health. Once the child is placed in that home, public health remains the lead supervisory agency. That supervisory role can be found in Section 1311 of Title 26 of the Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations. Neither Public Law 3639 or 3640 changed that requirement. So when this body passed those measures, it did so with the knowledge it is public health that decides what agency gets custody. It is public health who may remove the child whenever such action is necessary, and it is public health that is entitled to audit, review, and penalize the adoption agency. I take the time to go through each of these provisions, Mr. Chair, because I want to make it clear that what we're discussing today with Bill 206 is not about fixing any errors, and it is not about addressing any loophole in the law. Instead, we are discussing rules for the agencies that advocate for adoptive families. And both I and my 9 co-sponsors are saying that if we are going to go down this road, if we are going to make additional requirements for agencies that are chosen by public health to assist them, then we should do it the right way. That means, Mr. Chair, ensuring transparency. Right from the start, Bill 206 recognized that stakeholders in the general public should not be marginalized from the rulemaking process, regardless of whether those rules are temporary or not. This is simply the consistent thing to do, Mr. Chair, because if no bill can become law without a public hearing, why should it be different for any rule or regulation, especially if those rules are supposed to protect our most vulnerable children? Given that some government agencies have been operating off of draft rules for decades, Bill 206 makes it clear that even interim rules should be pertinent to the needs of the community. This decision immediately earned support from all parties across the board. The requirement to have the hearing at the Guam Congress building, which is a central, publicly recognized location, was also appreciated by public health. Second, Bill 206 says that if we are going to make new rule requirements on an overburdened agency, we either find the money to fund it or commit our own. That is why I appropriated funds the same way I have in the past with Public Laws 33229, Public Law 35125, and Public Law 36-6. And while it is still a small amount, Mr. Chair, CPS felt it was perhaps the best part of the bill because too often they are faced with unfunded mandates. Here, the funds from my office will assist public health in the publication of these rules, such as the cost for them to prepare and publicize the rules across all villages or however they see fit. And once those rules are finalized, I am more than happy to help them find additional funds for public health to aid them in their compliance efforts. I've done it before. And finally, Bill 206 is fair. This measure mandates that any new rules or regulations apply to all child placement agencies, not just adoption agencies. As we know, Guam continues to experience large numbers of children entering our welfare system at a rate far greater than those that are being adopted. Again, I believe in the men and women of CPS and in the current protections we have for foster care and adoptions. But if others want even clearer regulations for those that facilitate the process, then make it fair. This means that under Bill 206, Harvest House, a deeply important organization that advocates for foster families, would also require licensure. And they agree with that. Ms. Bethany Taylor passionately stated, and I quote, "As for Harvest House, this bill also puts checks and balances on us as a nonprofit."
Excuse me, Madam Chair, in all
to have
fairness,
rules-
is the time up? If we're going to follow the rules, let's follow the rules.
Please wrap up, Senator Torres.
For opening as well. No, for opening is limited to 5 minutes as well? Thank you.
I think we started from both the back and the front for the last couple of bills in the Committee of the Whole, so we'll start in the middle. Senator Sabina Perez.
Yeah, I think it would have been great to have Department of Public Health here because there are questions that, there are two bills before us, and it'd be good to get clarification on the different formats. I don't have any questions for the panel, this panel.
Thank you. Senator Brown?
I don't have any questions, but I'm going to make a comment. And it's unfortunate that I have to do this, but sometimes I have to call things as I see them when we talk about the issue of transparency. I, in my previous life in the legislature, have appropriated substantial amounts of my budget to other operations in the government of Guam, all the way down to getting conservation officers bullets for their guns, all the way down to getting research work at the University of Guam for soil conservation, other work, important work that students are doing at the university. I've never seen this where we have the budget people here at the legislature to come and attest to what, a measly $1,000? We want to talk about transparency, and yet in this legislature, we don't want to follow the process. If all we're talking about is a measly $1,000, and I think that's very easy to account for, then this whole process should end. We shouldn't be here this evening. But all the discussion is talking about is adoption, adoption agencies, processes and procedures of public health, yet public health is not here. We want to talk about how everybody supports this bill. I think some of us that were the most vocal a few months ago were the ones that said, yes, we need regulations to address adoption agencies so that we know in all fairness what the rules and regulations are for them and what the public has an expectation of how they're going to perform, so that if anyone else comes into the island, they know what the rules are. And publicly, we know what the expectations are that we're going to have for them. But what I see is a lot of maneuvering, in this bill in particular. A bill that substantively is related to public health that does not fall under the jurisdiction of the Appropriations Committee ends up in the Appropriations Committee because we appropriate $1,000 from our budget. If that's the formula, then I can take thousands of dollars out of my budget because the odds are fairly good I probably spend less than any other member in this body. So I can make sure my bill gets to the Appropriation Committee regardless of what the substantive issue is before us. Colleagues, you want to continue to go down these roads and play these games and think you can get away with it and it's not going to come back because this is how we manipulate the process to get what we want. Because it's all about appearances, so we can appear that we're doing such good for the people of Guam when behind the scenes we're so busy manipulating the system. And that is what has happened with this bill, unfortunately. How unfortunate that this has happened. And yet we're going to have our budget office here at the legislature. What, is Ms. Agnes going to attest that there's $1,000 in Senator Torres's budget? My dear colleagues, all this for a few pieces of silver so we can say we did this for the people of Guam. If you can do it the right way, which there's no reason why we couldn't have done it the right way, this would have been a non-issue. We wouldn't be here debating this issue. We'd all be here going, oh, let's move it to third reading and let's go home. But no, some of you guys continue to play this game and talk about the rules of procedure that you yourselves voted in without inclusion of the other members of this body. But we want to play on the side of the aisle whenever it's convenient for us, and then talk about the Republican Party of Guam when we don't even support fellow Republicans on the floor of this legislature. Let's not kid ourselves, people. Go ahead, continue to do what you do and play your games, and we'll be here to expose it. Transparency. Colleagues, if you vote for this, it's unfortunate because it's the children that get lost in this process. Months ago, we could have simply amended the bill to simply allow regulations from public health. Public health, who we've appropriated over $50 million this budget year just a few months ago in October, they need a measly $1,000 out of Senator Torres's budget to advertise rules and regulations. Do they really? I did attend that public hearing, colleagues, for those many of you that didn't. And they said they didn't need it. Yes, they could proceed and advertise for this public hearing without this $1,000. So who are we kidding here? Who are we kidding here, colleagues? When you continue in some cases when it's to your benefit to misappropriate and forward bills to committees that they're not supposed to be in because we want to make sure our bills get passed so that we can beat everybody else on an issue. It's wrong. I don't care how you call it, how you look at it, how you want to make it sound good, because you all want to take credit at the expense of others because you want to do it the wrong way. Well, go ahead and keep doing it. You know, it's always interesting. I've been around long enough to see how this stuff comes back on you, how it can come back on us because we're not doing it the right way. So colleagues, go ahead and play your little game tonight because it still doesn't change the reality of what's transacted with regards to this bill. And with that, I'll conclude so I stay within my minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Ada.
No questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ada. Senator Pt.2.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment. So if you want to start on the other side of the aisle, you know, I've got an amendment, so it's still loading up at this point.
Senator Pt.2, we were only on round one, so this is for questions for the panel.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, Then we do have a second round. Okay, thank you. And then I'll proffer my amendment on the second round. However, Madam Speaker, I'll say reserve it until the second round and provide my comments. However, I'd like to yield my time to Speaker Terlahi if she would like to use it on the first round. But the second round, I will come back with my amendment and make my comments, but yield it to the
Amendments
Speaker.
will come in the third and final round.
Okay, and I'll make my comments then. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker Terlahi.
Are you on my turn now? What about Senator Ada? Okay, so none of these senators were? All right. Yes, I'd like to pose some questions. First of all, the bill proposes that the Department of Public Health and Social Services promulgate interim rules for the licensing of adoption agencies and others, but these interim rules shall be exempt from the provisions of the Administrative Adjudication Act. That means, as far as I can tell from this, exempt from public input, notice to the public, exempt from having the draft rules available for review by anyone. And then it says in this bill, provided that such rules shall receive at least one public hearing by the Legislative Committee with subject matter jurisdiction. Yes, I'd like to ask if the sponsor would yield as to which legislative committee has subject matter jurisdiction.
For purposes of the public hearing, for the interim rules and regulations, that committee would be your committee, Madam Speaker.
The Committee on Health?
Yes.
Thank you. So the bill seems to you know, it's ironic because public health came in and said, oh, but we're in support of transparency, yet public health, in support of this bill, is absolutely saying bypass the entire AAA process, which is where the transparency comes in. It comes in with them bringing in stakeholders, giving notice to the public, and allowing them to review everything that they are going to be reviewing and promulgating these rules. And this would allow then no hearing, or require no hearing by public health. It requires that the legislative committee with subject matter jurisdiction, in this case, the Committee on Health, would have a public hearing here at the legislature, which I'm very open to because that's what I want to do. We want to have a public hearing on these rules and regulations that are going to be used to license adoption agencies. If I am going to have a public hearing, my committee normally is going to pay for the publication. So I'm curious, what is public health going to pay for with the $1,000? If it's not required to have a publication, a hearing, it's not required to publish or anything like that. I also wanted to ask if the sponsor would yield. So the beginning of the bill on page 3, section 2, it says that notwithstanding any other provision of law, rule, or regulation, any child placement agency operating Guam requires a license issued by the Department of Public Health and Social Services following the department's promulgation of interim rules pursuant to this act. I just want to clarify, does this prohibit them from acting then without the promulgation of interim rules, or does this allow them to operate pending the promulgation of interim rules?
Okay, those are two questions. Senator Torres, do you yield?
This is allowing them to have licensing following the promulgation of interim rules. It is anticipated that the interim rules will kick in place until such time that the final rules are done through the AAA process. So up to a year or until the final rules are adopted through the AAA process. So it is in the interim process. Once those rules are promulgated, then it kicks in.
All right, so prior to the promulgation of the interim rules, can an adoption agency practice on Guam without this license?
There is at least one adoption agency that we're aware of, Ohala, that is licensed to practice on Guam and has a relationship already with the Department of Public Health and Social Services. So yes, there is, to my knowledge, an adoption agency that is licensed as a nonprofit to do business on Guam.
So you're saying that one adoption agency is not required to get a license from public health pursuant to the interim rules and is allowed to practice without that. But others have to get a license from public health. This is my concern, is that when we passed that last law, we said they had to be licensed on Guam, and that was a big objection to the bill, at least on my part. It's that it's saying license, and it did not say licensed by the Department of Public Health. I'm very glad to see that we are now going to require them to be licensed by the Department of Public Health, and Public Health is in full support of being the entity to regulate this type of activity on Guam, where placement of children is being practiced. And so I would like this language to apply to all of the agencies, even, I mean, it should apply to all of them equally. So
That is the point of it, Madam Speaker.
that all agencies are going to be, and the passage of this bill, required to be licensed by public health pending, I mean, even pending the interim rules.
All placement agencies, yes.
Okay. All right. That's good, because I am concerned that they are practicing now without any rules and regulations and without any oversight by public health because of the lack of rules and regulations and the lack of any law that says they have to be licensed by public health. So that is a part of this bill that I fully support, where we are requiring that public health is going to license these agencies.
Point of information, though, I just want to add, there is oversight over what exists right now with the adoption agencies, if that's who you're referring to. In terms of public health has the oversight over them per law and can easily audit them and go in and discipline them right now. That is not something that is not provided for. In addition to the placement of children, that is all within the purview of public health.
Right, but they're operating only on a license from the Department of Revenue and Taxation, not from a license issued by public health, and not under any kind of rules and regulations by public health. That's the whole point. That's why this bill is necessary, or a prior bill was necessary, is to make sure that we are clarifying that they must be licensed now, not just by Revenue and Taxation, but also by the Department of Public Health and Social Services. And so I'm going to check with legal also, but I want to make sure that this language is doing that and not making any exception for any particular agency that may have been licensed by Revenue and Taxation to operate differently than what we are now requiring everyone to operate with a license from public health under interim rules and under final rules. I guess I'll just check with the panel there then. The OFB originally said pretty much they didn't address the question as to whether there was funds available. Subsequent to the committee report being issued, there was a letter issued by the legislature saying there is $1,000 available from this account.
Yes, Speaker.
Thank you. I raised a similar concerns with the previous speaker, or a prior speaker, regarding the placement of the $1,000 appropriation in this bill and the bypassing of the Committee on Health and the promulgation of interim rules and regulations and permanent rules and regulations by the Department of Public Health, especially for adoption agencies and for the licensing of any person who has any kind of authority to place children or to vet the placement of children. I brought this up to the Office of Finance and Budget, to the Committee on Rules several times, and during the meeting on the Committee on Rules, and I had asked that if the $1,000 was confirmed to be available, because that is what our standing rules say, is that the Office of Finance and Budget or the Committee on Appropriations shall determine whether that is a viable funding source, and if that was determined to be viable, it allows for re-referral of the bill to the primary, the committee with primary jurisdiction. But that was not done. No re-referral was made in this case. And I think that is really the source of the contention on the bill. I don't think anybody objects to the fact that we want to license adoption agencies. We want them to be licensed by public health and not just revenue and taxation, or that we want there to be interim rules while public health creates final rules. Frankly, I wish public health would have just given us some interim rules right now, and that we adopt this instead of all this, controversy and running around as to, which committee should be hearing the bill on adoption rules and regulations. And anyways, I think there's truly an issue that exists. Public Health confirmed during the public hearing that they are not currently able to, under the current law and without rules and regulations, to truly monitor adoption cases that are occurring right now, the number of cases filed, those that are granted termination of parental rights, the number that have had home studies or not, the number of children that have left the island pursuant to supposed adoptions, and they're not even sure whether they are being notified in those cases and able to monitor. So I think this is why rules and regulations and licensing are a very, very urgent matter. And we need to ensure that there are concrete safeguards for the well-being of the children, and that we keep public health oversight intact and not allow loopholes for agencies to work around them. So I was glad to see at the public hearing that everyone is in concurrence with working with public health on these things. I think public health is trying to consult with their Region 9, and it sounds like a very complex matter, the licensing of adoption agencies. And that's why they were unable to provide any interim rules prior to passage of this bill.
Speaker, your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Nelson, do you have any questions for the panel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps also, if the sponsor could answer some of these questions. Is there a screening process in any part of the government that can be in effect to protect these children with this bill? Do adoptive families undergo a screening process, or can anyone just adopt a child?
There are laws in Title 19 with regard to adoptions on Guam. Basically, it's public health that has a purview over adoptions on Guam, the screening of the adopted homes and clearing them, The courts also have jurisdiction over granting the termination of parental rights and the final decree of adoption. And there's also so public health has that, and so there's also in the Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations the adoption guidelines. So in terms of if you're speaking about adoptions, then yes, the protections that we talked about with the children are in Title 19 and in the 26 Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations.
What is the purpose of publishing interim rules? Why not just require them to do rules and regulations, Madam Chair?
I can.
Yes, Senator Torres, do you yield?
One of the reasons that we were looking at this is that there has been a lot of, with the other two bills, there's a lot of discussion about the need for interim rules, the regulation of the adoption agencies on Guam. And so we went further to look at what was the true concern. And I want to pull from a statement made by Deputy Director Uggan at the public hearing when we were talking about adoptions and the need to have broad language for who is regulated in the interest of protecting children. So Deputy Director Uggan confirmed at the public hearing that most adoptions on Guam are private adoptions, which are not under the purview of Child Protective Services. And I'll read a quote from him. He stated that these women who give birth, who say they have somebody in mind for their children, and it's through that process that excludes us here at Public Health. They've identified who the family is going to be, often these families that they've known for a period of time, and this has been the traditional practice here on island. Now, here lately, it seems like there are other adoptions taking place at the level of the hospitals, in which case, perhaps the mom doesn't know this family as well, and she really doesn't know exactly what the placement of their child is going to look like. So these adoptions and these stories that CPS has expressed concern about is that they are not the ones facilitated by the agencies. The ones that Director Uggan states that are of concern are the traditional practices on Guam are between individuals or private families. And so the outcry and the concern was for protecting all the children that don't just go through public health system, that we actually need rules to address anybody that helps in the placement of children, either for foster or adoptive care. So if you think about the issue too, if you know where the harm on children is generally placed, there's a startling statistic with the National Foster Youth Institute that 60% of all child trafficking victims in the U.S. were in the child welfare system. So if you're really looking for the welfare of the kids, it really shouldn't just be adoption agencies, because there's far more kids in the foster care system and in the welfare system than there are in the adoption process. So the idea is interim rules often take a while if they go through the administrative adjudication law. I mean, the permanent rules take a while if they go through the administrative adjudication law, and that's why the idea was, let's get interim rules in place, but let's make it transparent. Let's get the word out there so people can come to the public hearing, you know, do whatever they can do to make awareness there, and then work towards the permanent rules. I hope I was responsive.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I have another follow-up question.
Please state your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How does this bill provide transparency when earlier some colleagues were stating concern that this was not a transparent process? How does this bill provide transparency? And if so, how does it provide transparency?
Well, it provides transparency in that the interim rules that are developed are subject to a public hearing. So there is an opportunity for the public to be involved and to weigh in, even at the interim rule stage. And then, of course, the more permanent rules will go through the administrative adjudication process. And transparent, too, in that it calls for a public hearing at a place that is regularly and typically known to people, this Guam Congress building, as a place where they can come and express their views. So that was why it was framed that way.
So I have another follow-up question, Madam Chair. Are you saying that this bill will provide interim rules, and when that interim rules are completed, that there is going to be another public hearing to have public input and feedback for those interim rules?
Yes, that is what this bill provides for.
Okay. This is just round one, right? Okay. That's all the questions I have at this time, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Nelson. Senator Torres, any questions for the panel?
Not for the panel, but I did want to just express that I do have an amendment that I was going to proffer.
Senator Torres, we will take the amendments in the third round.
Yes.
Thank you. Senator Moylan? Thank you. Okay, we are now in the second round of questions, beginning with Senator Perez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I noticed that basically this is not going to be codified, but yet there's a definition that is introduced here. Child placement agencies. I think that's problematic, in my opinion, because you're introducing a term that does not yet exist in GCA, or it's not defined to align with what's in this bill, which will not be codified. So again, I think we're seeing introductions of terms that should have been introduced in GCA, but we're seeing amendments to things in GAR, and now a non-codified bill, potentially a non-codified legislation. So I think that's problematic about this particular bill. It really puts the onus. So in a way, we're kind of working backwards, right? We're creating these definitions that should have already existed in GCA. So that's one issue that I see with this bill. I mean, of course, I support rules and regs that has a stamp of approval from Department of Public Health rather than, being a licensed company simply by a business license. I think that's an improvement, and this should have been taken care of in the first bill. And but I'm glad that it's being taken care of as far as it's being addressed so quickly. But again, I think that's one of the issues that I see with this. Yeah, I think that's just my comment. And if there's any additional time, I would like to allow the speaker, if she would like to use that time, reserved time.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Senator Ada. Oh, I'm sorry. Would you like to yield to the question, Senator Torres?
I just wanted to,
Sorry, a point of
was it a
information,
question?
that wasn't a question, it was a comment. And so we're going against the rules of engagement.
okay, I just want to add a point of information. It is correct that child placement agency is a definition.
Objection.
All right, thank you. I was
You
trying
can
to be.
state your point of information, Senator Torres.
The point of information that I was going to make is that that term will have the opportunity to be heard at a public hearing, either when the interim rules are adopted or in the AAA process of the final rules. So it was understood, and we're well aware of that.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Senator Ada.
No questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Titlegy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, Madam Chair, this is the reason why, you know, it's important to have public health here, because many of the questions that we have should be addressed to public health. I mean, that's the agency that runs, you know, Child Protective Services, and it can answer most of these questions, especially the one that was asked by one of my colleagues with regards to, you know, are there any adoption, you know, rules or guidance, you know, and it was mentioned and it was answered, it's in the GAR. Well, there are some mention of adoption in the GAR, but it only pertains to public health. It does not pertain to independent agencies acting as adopted agencies. It doesn't pertain to that. It only pertains to public health. So it's not private agencies that are being addressed in the GAR that was mentioned earlier. And that's what we're here for, talking about how we're going to license these companies who come to Guam, companies that are already, a company that's already advertising in the paper. And it's ironic, Madam Speaker, because I was just, Madam Chair, that I was just speaking with an individual for public health in that agency, that department particularly, that they were just, you know, first they said they are working on the rules and regulations currently, from what I gather, that what this person has said, they're working on rules and regulations. And that they just don't understand why this wasn't done a few months ago, when other bills were passed by this legislature, Bill 108, I believe, and Bill 109, incorporated. It's just, you know, it's exhausting, you know, Madam Chair. It's just exhausting. Trying to fight for something that we are trying to put into place to protect our children. But not giving up, not at all, but it is exhausting to spend so much of our time like this over legislation that, because it was not put in the first place in bills that this body passed, that we have to be here today to discuss this and say some things that most of us would rather not say, but the reality is we have to tell the truth on what's going on here. And for anybody to say that it's as simple as promulgating rules and regulations and then that's it, and then we wait till the administrative process goes through is incorrect. This bill doesn't do that. This bill, an interim, it was asked, what are interim rules and regulations? It's created by the department and agencies to follow, right? We're giving them the authority to do so, bypassing the Administrative Adjudication Act. However, this bill doesn't do that. This bill says, and create the interim rules and regulations, and then after that, you have to bring these rules, because it won't be effective until you bring these interim rules and regulations to the legislature so it can pass in a bill into law. very close to the AAA process. Why do we have to take these interim rules and put it in a bill form to pass? So this bill doesn't do that. It's not as simple as that. I only have 32 seconds, so. Madam Chair, we're all trying to do the same thing here, create rules and regulations, but we're trying to do this as quickly as possible. That's the whole purpose, what we're doing here. As fast as possible, and this bill doesn't do that. It still creates another wall of bureaucracy, and that is having the legislature have to approve the interim rules and regulations. Then why call it interim rules if it has to come back to the legislature to be approved? Thank you, ma'am. My time is up.
Thank you, Senator Titlegy. Speaker Terlahi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I also like to echo the sentiments of my colleagues about the process. So, how much time are we saving? We're allowing public health to adopt interim rules and regulations without any input, without any kind of input, until they come down here. And so public health, said they support this bill because they wanted transparency. But what they have done is approve a bill that would not require them to have any transparency, but to send rules here for the final leg of the AAA process. But for all the other legs where public health is supposed to be required to draft the rules, have them available for anyone, publish them so people can come into their agencies and pick up a copy or find them online or wherever they're going to put them, where they were going to schedule a public hearing themselves or more than one, as many as they needed to get the input of the people who want to have input, make changes to these rules based on the input from the public hearings, and continue to perfect the rules. And they have said that the process is so complex because there is so much concern over this type of regulation, according to Region 9. That they're trying to get the ideal rules, but they're not going to be simple rules. They're very complex, and that's why they can't do it fast enough. So we are supposedly giving them a quick process where they get to skip all of that public input process, send it down here where public health loses complete control of their rules and regulations, and we will take control of their rules and regulations. The legislature, again, will be the one to say, which concerns of public health we're going to honor and which ones we're not. And so I just want to reiterate what the laws that we have in place and why we need rules and regulations as urgently as possible. Because we've passed laws, the legislature in enacting the 2 former laws regarding adoption agencies, and by the way, these adoption agencies are advertising in the newspaper. They're advertising on the legislative channel pursuant to the Committee on Rules of Consent. They've got pamphlets in the legislative hall. I don't know where else on Guam. And we're saying by this bill that they're not licensed under public health. So they're adoption agencies licensed under Department of Revenue and Taxation without regulation. So hopefully we're going to get something passed where they're going to be regulated. Because right now the 2 laws that were passed earlier, Bill 108, mandates that a child is placed in an adoptive home by social services or public health or a Guam licensed adoption agency. And currently, again, that just means licensed by the Department of Revenue and Taxation. The supervision in an adoptive home is under the guidance of social services or a Guam licensed adoption agency. And this is the story that I heard about babies being taken out of the hospital by not public health, because there's a provision of the law that allows for a newborn child to be taken by an adoption agency representative to a pre-approved adoptive home or temporary shelter care home until permanent placement occurs, where the law used to allow natural parents caseworker to place child in a previously arranged foster home, if adoptive home has not yet been selected. The current laws, without rules and regulations, allows adoption agencies to place a child in a proposed adoptive home where only the Division of Social Services was allowed to do that before. It allows a representative from an independent Guam licensed adoption agency to be a member of the Adoption Screening Committee, responsible for reviewing adoption applications and selecting adoptive parents for each child legally available for adoption and/or given up to social services for placement. So it also places them within the public health's own process of screening their own potential families and the baby's needs and puts them in there now without rules and regulations in place that regulate who can. I guess I can tomorrow declare myself an adoption agency and get a license under revenue and taxation, and there really are no other requirements, despite, you know, we might have some operating here who have put on themselves a great deal of other requirements, which I appreciate, but not required by our law right now. So until these interim rules and regulations are put in place, I feel this is an urgent matter. And so I'm quite perplexed by public health. I feel bad that they're not here to answer questions, because these are very critical questions as to the welfare of children, whether they're admitting, we discussed this at the public hearing, whether they heard about the babies being taken out of the hospitals. This concern has come to me from some very legitimate sources, even about prospective parents being, suggested that take the babies off island. No one's going to follow you there because they do not have the means to do that, to challenge the placement of that baby into some family that subsequently travels off island, and you'd have to track them down and incur legal expenses and other costs. And I'm very concerned about that. And so of course, rules and regulations are very important. I think public health needs to do their utmost. They should have those now. They said they had no problem with these laws being put into place. Now they're saying they need rules and regulations in order to do any kind of enforcement or regulation. And I can't understand that logic at all. Why allow any of those actions to occur if you're not going to take responsibility for what happens to the babies? And they can't legally even do that. So I have no objection if this is going to come to my committee ultimately for a public hearing, but I have objection that we're going to spend the same amount of time getting to these rules and regulations, getting back to the legislature getting to do whatever it wants with those rules and regulations, as opposed to just allowing public health to adopt their interim rules and regulations as fast as possible, like an emergency basis, as is allowed. The current AAA allows for emergency rules and regulations for when rules and regulations are required by federal grants. And we could have easily allowed them to adopt emergency rules and regulations and put the burden on public health to come up with their rules sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Terlahi. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a caveat on the previous speaker. What is why didn't public health create their own interim rules in accordance with the adjudication process for the sponsor of the bill?
Does the author yield to the question?
I would object that public health is not here to answer that question. This is the reason we need public health here, to answer why they did not do that. Important question.
There's been an objection.
I still have the question, Madam
Yes,
Speaker.
the question is still here. Senator Torres, do you yield to the question?
I will not put words in public health's mouth, but what I want to represent is that we've always known that public health, and it's been said, they've always had the ability to promulgate rules and regulations on their own. One of the things that we have to, with regard to the interim rules and the hearing, though, one of the ideas is that, as one of the speakers previously mentioned, there's some discussion here now about broadening this to child placement agencies and all people that help in the placement of children for foster care, including therapeutic homes, foster homes, and adoption agencies. So the scope of the intent of this licensing is beyond just adoption agencies. And I think that that's a pertinent point that we need to drive here, and that is why the public hearing process, Public Health concurred with it during the public hearing of the bill, because this is broad, and that is where they wanted engagement and participation in that, even in the interim process.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Chair, I just want to quote from the committee report where it says, this is from Terry Uggan, who is the Deputy Director of DPHSS. He also oversees BOSA, which is the Bureau of Social Services Administration. And in quotes, Bill 206-36 LS allows for the Department of Public Health and Social Services interim rules to remain in place for a period of 1 year or until the promulgation and rules pursuant to the Administration Adjudication Act, whichever comes first. This provision that requires the promulgation and publication of these interim rules and regulations aligns with the Open Government Law, 5 GCA Government Operations, Chapter 8 Open Government Law. So here we have the Deputy Director of DPHSS stating that the community does not have to wait for the legislature to receive these interim rules. It says that the bill allows for the rules to remain in place for a period of 1 year or until the promulgation and rules pursuant to the administrative adjudication, which is part of the concern here, whichever comes first. And in addition, Bill 206-36 LS provides $1,000 to help the Department of Public Health and Social Services prepare for publish these rules, which will help pay for ads in newspapers to inform the community and request for stakeholders' input to cover the expenses for rules to be published in newspapers and at the mayor's office and for community review. So we're getting the community involved. The measure will ensure transparency and public participation by allowing rules and regulations to be accessible to the public for review, comment, and recommendation. This approach will allow for community input and will instill public confidence in the Guam adoption process. Therefore, the Department of Public Health is in favor of Bill 206-36 LS for the clarity, a minimum of 1 year to put forth the final rules and regulations, and most importantly, its adjunct with the open government law. And so I'm hearing different perspectives of what the bill does, but this is the Deputy Director stating that the interim rules will remain in place for a period of 1 year or until the promulgation and rules pursuant to the Administrative Adjudication Act, or whichever comes first. So there was one concern about things being done quickly. There was another concern about the AAA process. There was a concern about the community not having a comment or recommendation period, but the Deputy Director states, "The measure will ensure transparency and public participation by allowing rules and regulations to be accessible to the public for review, comment, and recommendation." So I'm just trying to understand if DPHSS is supportive of it, and if DPHSS is saying things that it offers transparency, it allows for the Adjudication Act or the interim rules to remain in place for a year, or whichever comes first. I mean, and they're saying that public participation is allowed with the rules and regulations, and it will be up for public review, comment, and recommendation. I'm trying to connect the concerns that have been laid out on the floor in those cases. I think I'll stop talking because my only 20 seconds left. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Torres, do you have any questions?
I think it's third round for her. But point of information, Madam Chair,
We have not finished the second round yet, so we will end at Senator Moylan for the second round, then we will begin the third round. Please state your point of
Yes.
information.
Senator Torres began the first round, so she's on third round.
She had an opening statement for her bill.
That's the
so-
first round.
No,
Anyways,
that's not her
Madam
first
Chair,
round. We're in the second round now.
The point of information, public health is describing in that testimony the AAA process for the final rules and regulations, which of course allows for public input and all of that in the final rules. The issue is what we're authorizing them to do is to bypass that AAA process for interim rules and regulations. That's the difference.
Thank you. Senator Torres.
I don't have anything to add. I just want to make a point of information that the transparency is there with the interim rules, with the conducting of a public hearing at the legislature. So in terms of openness and transparency, while yes, the AAA process will apply to the final rules, the interim rules transparency is satisfied by the public hearing.
Thank you. Senator Dueñas. Thank you. And Senator Moylan? Okay, thank you. We've completed the second round of questions. We will now begin with the amendments. We'll take a short recess. The panel now. Thank you. The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. We will now begin with amendments, starting with those that were received first. So we will begin with Senator Torres. This is on amendment on page 3.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment is on page 3. It is to amend Section 2A to read, notwithstanding any other provisions of law or rule, any child placement agency in Guam is required to be licensed by the Guam Department of Public Health and Social Services, paren department, close paren, following the promulgation of interim rules in accordance with this act. Child placement agency means any person that is not licensed to practice law in Guam, corporation, partnership, voluntary association, or other entity or identifiable group of entities, whether established for profit or otherwise, aside from Child Protective Services, that places, plans for, or assists in the placement of any unrelated minor for care in a foster home, therapeutic foster home, or adoptive home, to include adoptions and placements for temporary or protective custody. Madam Chair, as my sponsors know, the definition of child placement agencies in this bill is purposefully broad, comprehensive, and will receive a public hearing, allowing it to be refined if necessary. This amendment may be superfluous, but I want to make it clear that the adoptive homes we are discussing here include adoptions under Guam law. I believe it does, and it is my intent, but just to be abundantly clear, I'm including that language in the amendment. This amendment has also been reviewed by our legal counsel, and I ask my colleagues for their support when I make with this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Torres. On the amendment, Speaker Terlahi, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the additional words that have been added. I just want to clarify that, so right now it says, any child placement agency operating in Guam is required to be licensed by Public Health following the promulgation of interim rules. And I want to be clear again, what happens prior to the promulgation of interim rules? Does that mean none is licensed, but they still have to be licensed? I mean, can they act prior to the interim rules, and can they act prior to licensing by Public Health?
Do you yield to the question, Senator Torres?
Yes, Madam Chair, under my understanding, Public Health is just right now operating under what is existing in their rules and regs and under Guam law. So without interim rules for the licensing, there is no process that they can go by. So the idea is the interim rules will kick in and the licensing of all agencies will occur following the interim rules.
Does that satisfy your question, Speaker?
I guess I'm going to proffer whether it would be clearer to say is required to be licensed by the Department of Public Health pursuant to interim rules or final rules in accordance with this act. And that makes very clear that without that licensing, they're not authorized to act.
Is that an amendment to the amendment?
Yes, what do you think?
But Madam Speaker, I just want to bring up the fact that you are now, is it your intention to nullify any agency that is lawfully licensed in Guam right now by your amendment? I don't understand the intent of your amendment.
It's that if we're requiring child placement agencies to be licensed by public health pursuant to this bill, then I think that we should hold in abeyance any action by child placement agencies until they are licensed.
So are you then saying that Harvest House ceases to exist? Any placement therapeutic foster agencies cease to exist? Because that would be the effect. I mean, right now, these placement agencies are in existence, and the bill is contemplating to, if we were to desire to have rules and regulations for these by public health, for the licensing of them, that we have to complete the first step of establishing the rules and regs which would govern how these child placement agencies are licensed. So you cannot, short of that, you can't move forward until you have a process, and the process is what we are contemplating. And this, by the way, language was at the, after review of legal counsel and upon recommendation for further clarification. So we are simply yielding to the recommendation and the wordsmithing by legal counsel to make it clearer.
Thank you, Senator Torres. We will take a minute's recess to get this amendment to the amendment in writing. We are in recess. The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. Speaker Terlahi, you are recognized on your amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, and thank you for the recess to proffer an amendment to this floor amendment. This floor amendment highlights that the bill is not just talking about adoptions or licensing adoption agencies. It's also talking about licensing persons who place plans for or assist in the placement of a a minor in a foster home, therapeutic foster home as well. And so my amendment is to remove the mention of the foster home and the therapeutic foster home. I don't think foster placement is currently at risk for being unlicensed, because no foster placement is allowed without public health's involvement. It's only adoptions that are currently, prior to the promulgation of rules and regs, being allowed or, presumably not required to be licensed. And because foster homes are always required to be licensed, that's always been the case. And so I just think the issue that we have before us is the lack of licensing for adoption agencies. And foster homes are people who assist, like they mentioned Harvest House, who assist in the placement of children. They assist, but they do not have the final say in where a child will be placed. That is public health when it comes to foster children. But with the amended law, when it comes to adoption agencies have much greater latitude in the placement of children, removing children from the hospitals, that type of thing. So they are the ones whose licensing is urgent, who we are going out of our way to allow public health to do some funky interim way of adopting rules and regulations, because we find it to be that important that it has to be done sooner rather than later. So any additional licensing of foster homes or therapeutic foster homes, those are so strictly governed right now by public health. I don't think that's urgent. What's urgent is this interim licensing by public health for adoption agencies. So my amendment is to, first of all, require that they be licensed by public health pursuant to interim and final rules. That means they should not be acting without that licensing by public health, because right now they're acting with licensing under revenue and taxation only. And if we are saying by this bill that it is imperative that they be licensed by public health, then I think we should make sure that no one can act until they are licensed, either pursuant to interim or final rules as an adoption agency. That's how we bring forward the intent of this bill. And I think and then I'm removing the words foster home, therapeutic home, and to include adoptions and placement for temporary or protective custody. Temporary and protective custodies are completely governed by public health, so is therapeutic and the foster home. So I just feel like we can remove those safely, but we also have to safely require licensing by public health immediately.
Thank you, Speaker. On the amendment to the amendment, Senator Torres, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, there are over 500 children in the foster care system, 500 children who are handled by different people in the foster care system, and the therapeutic foster care system as well. 500 children. The inclusion of these child placement agencies is specifically to put, as Bethany Taylor so eloquently put it, in her own words at the public hearing in favor of this bill. This measure and consideration of child placement agencies puts checks and balances on all of us to have rules and regulations in their efforts in helping coming alongside CPS and in the efforts of getting these children into proper homes, whether they're foster care or adoptive homes. We are talking about the protection of the most vulnerable children, and even those people in the system with their very close relationships with CPS already agree. Checks and balances are important, they're necessary, and they're welcomed. They're welcomed. So let's be fair if we're going to really be truly concerned about as many as 500 children in our community who are displaced from their homes for various reasons. Let's be consistent across the board. And that's all that we're asking, and that's why everybody agreed with it. They thought it was sound. All those that were affected believed that it was sound and perfectly reasonable. So I object to this amendment respectfully, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Torres. There has been an objection registered on the amendment to the amendment. Senator Teichler, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity. Madam Chair, I stand in full support of this. It was just a few minutes ago I was talking to one of the staff who writes bills and had a concern, especially with this particular language on foster home, therapeutic foster home. You know, we're jeopardizing, by including them, you're jeopardizing these other entities like foster care, therapeutic, by putting this in this legislation, they would have to start all over again, because we all know that this bill has to go through a process, not only creating the interim rules, but interim rules have to go through legislation to get approved, which is ironic because interim rules are supposed to be interim and not the legislature to approve it. But now you're jeopardizing these other, Bethany, her work, and the other individuals who oversee this division for foster homes. You know, there has not been major issues with public health other than that they're short-staffed with social workers when it comes to foster homes. We're here addressing adoption agencies. But by keeping this in, you're requiring them to also be licensed through these interim rules and then later on in the AAA process. So, and like it was said earlier, there are already rules and regulations that govern foster care homes and the ability for these private, nonprofit organizations that oversee that. So by striking this out, we maintain that these areas are still followed by what's governed behind public health right now. But by keeping it in, Madam Chair, I'm pretty sure we're going to get a call from Bethany pretty soon if she's listening right now. So I stand in full support of this. I mean, let's keep it to what we were here for, and that is to discuss the adoption agencies, these companies coming to the island and opening up on this island. That's what we have to, because nothing in the GAR talks about independent adoption agencies, nothing. It talks about adoption under what the guidelines of public health has to follow, but not adoption agencies, companies, whether private or nonprofit. So we really need to think about this and vote in favor of it, else you're going to be getting a call from some of these foster families, which we need more of too, by the way. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Teichler. On the amendment to the amendment. Speaker Terlahi, you may close.
Thank you very much. Yes, public health is short of foster homes. The mayors are trying to assist by finding foster homes that children can be placed in by public health. The group foster home is not yet open for unbelievable reasons. It's still delayed. So we have shortages of foster homes, but we are not short on the licensing of foster homes. We are not short on the regulation of foster homes. They are strictly regulated by public health right now. No one can be placed in a home without licensing by public health, a foster home. That foster home has to be licensed. And they've said this repeatedly at hearings. And Harvest House is not a child placement agency. They do not take children out of the hospital. They do not decide which foster home they're going to go to. Only public health does that. Harvest House does very critical work in assisting public health, training parents, providing supplies, many things, but they do not dictate the placement. They cannot vet a home, decide which child is going to go where. Only public health does it, and they do that right now pursuant to rules and regulations. What we're trying to do, or what I'm hoping we're trying to do by this bill, is to take care of the activity that is currently unregulated, not licensed by public health, and allow public health to get some control of that. Allow public health to do what we say we're going to do. Give them the authority over that as quick as possible, and have them be able to monitor those things as immediately as possible. That's why I'm saying in the first part of my amendment that first of all, we're not going to say they have to be licensed following the promulgation of interim rules. We're going to say they need to be licensed now. Now, prior to any other action, they must be licensed by public health. And because we're requiring them to be licensed, we are pushing public health to provide these interim rules as fast as possible. That's the reason why this bill is, hopefully that's the reason why this bill is bypassing the AAA and the public input and all of the public hearings and all of that. Only because we want them to be licensed right away, and we want public health to come up with rules and regulations so that they can be licensed according to those rules and regulations right away. Not to prolong this for 180 days and to allow them to continue to act without public health oversight. I am really hoping that is the intent, because if that's not the intent, then I completely object to this bill. This bill just prolongs what's happening right now, and that is unlicensed or adoption agencies licensed only by the Department of Revenue and Taxation and not by public health. And I was hoping that's not the intent, and we're trying to do the opposite. We recognize they must be licensed by public health, just like foster homes are licensed, and we want adoption agencies to be licensed by public health. Public health has said that that is such a complex regulation, according to their Region 9, that they have been consulting to try to come up with these rules and regulations, that it is so complex. That's why they haven't promulgated those rules yet. Because we passed the bill in July without the rules and regulations, and now they're scrambling to do rules and regulations. And so we're trying to give them a big break by giving them an out from the AAA process to make it faster, but it's just complex. And so I say, wait for the rules and regulations, wait for the licensing by public health, assist public health to get that done as soon as possible, but get it done. But don't just create a big loophole for the adoption agencies to continue to act without licensing of public health. They have all testified that they agree they should be licensed by public health. They agree. Everyone who testified agrees that public health should license these agencies and that they should be required to be licensed before they act, before they're allowed to make placements, before they're allowed to remove babies from the hospital. I think that's urgent. So I'm asking my colleagues to support this amendment.
Thank you, Speaker. There's been an objection to the amendment. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Amendment fails. We are still on the main amendment offered by Senator Torres. Anyone on the amendment? On the amendment,
On the amendment?
you may continue, Speaker Terlahi.
On the amendment, I would object to the amendment because it adds the words at the end, to include adoptions and placements for temporary or protective custody. I don't know, it's confusing because temporary or protective custody is strictly governed by public health right now. And I don't think we need to give them any more outs from following their own rules and regulations and their own licensing procedures in, when it comes to temporary or protective custody or foster placement. And I thought I asked it earlier when we were discussing the bill. I mean, that was my specific question, and I thought I got clarification, but I apparently was absolutely wrong. And that this bill is going to require, and this amendment is going to require, licensing only following the promulgation of interim rules. In every other, I don't know if you remember what happened with, there was a delay in the not the B&B, but what are those other temporary, the short-term rentals, right? They couldn't even license any without rules and regs, none. And we waited for years. Finally, we allowed, some kind of interim rules and regs, or said these are, they don't need any rules. They can just license them and start to collect the revenues. And this is one of those things. It's like we want them to be licensed right away. We don't want them to have no rules in the interim. I thought that's why we are bending over backwards to bypass the regular rules and regulations process, because we're requiring them to be we should be requiring them to be licensed right away. I can't see any reason why we're going to say it's so important that they be licensed, yet allow a big loophole in the interim. So I would object to this amendment.
Thank you, Speaker Terlahi. On the Torres amendment, Senator Nelson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The amendment reads, notwithstanding any other provision of law or rule or regulation, any child placement agency operating in Guam is required to be licensed by the Guam Department of Public Health and Social Services, following the promulgation of interim rules in accordance with this act. Child placement agency means any person that is not licensed to practice law in Guam corporation, partnership, voluntary association, or other entity or identifiable group of entities, whether established for profit or otherwise aside from child protective services, that places plans for or assists in the placement of any unrelated minor for care in a foster home, therapeutic foster home, or adoptive foster home, to include adoptions and placements for temporary or protective custody. I think I'm just going to say it. I support this amendment, but I don't think that this amendment or this bill is the issue here, because there is another similar bill. And they're both providing the same thing. The only thing that this bill is different from is that it allows the interim process rules to go through the legislature. The other bill doesn't do that. We're advocating for AAA process. Well, the other bill that went clearly through the session and placed in third reading waived the AAA process. So I'm just trying to get my mind wrapped around, while this bill has an extra layer of protection by providing the opportunity to go through the legislature, I'm trying to get my mind wrapped around why would we object something when we know that foster placement is an issue. We know that the children are suffering. We know that there's not enough foster homes. We know that CPS needs additional help. So I'm trying to understand what is the real reasoning behind this? And the only thing I can come up with, Madam Chair, is that maybe because the person that is proposing the amendment and there's a disagreement there. This does nothing to harm anybody. As a matter of fact, it provides more help. This is not a reckless amendment. This amendment ensures that we're inclusive of everything that the children are suffering, that are going through. I just, maybe I'm not seeing something, but this is an amendment to include adoptions and placements for temporary or protective custody. And why wouldn't we want to be inclusive? Why wouldn't we want more help? Why wouldn't we want more assistance? And someone mentioned Harvest House. I didn't even see Harvest House in the amendment. If Harvest House is playing a role, do we have something against that? I don't know, is it a nonprofit organization? Do we have something against that? From what I understand is those people, through their church, has found people to open up homes for the children that are newborn infants, whose parents are giving birth to children who are suffering through withdrawals from different types of substances that their parents used, who are helping to put children in safer homes because in their own home that they're suffering from different types of abuse, sexual, physical, and emotional. Children are not being cared for. I don't see anything where it says Harvest House here, but it was mentioned. I don't understand why. This is just to ensure more help from what I see. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Point of information, Madam Chair.
Please state your point of
Yes,
information.
there was a statement made or question that this bill is the same as another bill that was previously moved to the third reading but it's completely different. That bill requires that DPS shall adopt rules and regulations and that each adoption agency shall be required to be licensed by public health in accordance with those rules and regulations. It does not authorize, like this bill does, adoption agencies to act without licensing. That's the issue. That's what I'm trying to point out. And point of personal privilege regarding my reference to Harvest House, that's because I was asked by the sponsor of the bill whether I intended to prevent Harvest House from acting. I'm trying to clarify, no, I want them to continue to act. Foster care is completely different than adoptions. And it's licensed. They don't act without licensing those homes. And they're currently able, as the previous speaker pointed out, to assist in this process right now without violating any licensing laws, without dictating placements themselves, without any licensing laws.
Thank you, Speaker.
Point of information, Madam Chair.
Please state your point of information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Also, Madam Chair, it stated that the bill, it's different in nature. It is from another bill, especially when it comes to, just to let you know that adoption agencies means a private, public, or nonprofit child placement entity licensed by the Department of Public Health and Social Services, and the laws have gone to place. This incorporates foster homes. This incorporates therapeutic foster homes, and it doesn't do that in the other bill. It doesn't bring foster care homes into the mix, because that is being governed right now by Department of Public Health and Social Services. All those children who need, care, need a shelter, a home, are being placed by Public Health and Social Services, and they're doing their due diligence to make sure these children are placed correctly. And these nonprofit organizations are doing the same, and it's already governed by law. So there is a difference in the two, one other bill and this bill, because the definition does not include foster, which, Madam Chair, now we're jeopardizing their homes, those nonprofit organizations that deal with foster care, Ragalu, all those other places that follow the rules and regulations of public health.
Thank you, Senator
And,
Titlery.
so Madam Chair, this is different.
Point of
So-
information,
Thank
Madam
you very
Chair.
much, Senator Titlery. Majority Leader, please state your point of information.
The amendment is different, yes, but essentially, the context of both bills are very similar.
Yes.
But it was stated earlier that 60% of the trafficking issues that our colleagues have brought up is through the welfare system. And so that is why it would behoove us to include these situations of foster families and foster homes to make sure that we are monitoring all angles.
On the main amendment, the Torres amendment, you may close, Senator Torres. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to understand, because there seems to be a lot of talk, but I'm looking at the amendment, and I'm just going to read off exactly what my predecessor read off earlier. Notwithstanding any provisions of law, any child placement agency operating Guam is required to be licensed. Very simple. Get a license, you can operate, right? Second part, when you go to the word child placement agency, means it gives a definition, and then it says what it's for. In relations to the top. And it included the adoption and placement for temporary protective custody. And just for little information, when people say that revenue and tax weren't allowed to license people for short-term rental, most of you people didn't work at revenue and tax. I did. We did give license. So please, if you didn't work at the agency, don't speak for the agency.
Objection, Madam
So,
Chair. We
being
passed
that-
a law in here to authorize them because they were not able to do
There
it.
has been an objection.
Madam Chair, I'm talking about the placement. I just wanted to give that information because I am a former employee of revenue and tax. Okay? So
Thank you for
moving
your
along
point of
on this
information.
amendment, I just want to get clarification, and if it's clear what it says, then I'll move on.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Do you yield to the question?
If I understand correctly, the question was with regard to who does this apply to? Was that the question?
Yes, please.
The child placement agency, I'll define what it means. It's any person that is not licensed to practice law in Guam, so not lawyers. Corporation, partnership, voluntary associations, or other entity or identifiable group of entities, whether established for profit or not profit, aside from Child Protective Services. All of these that place, plan for, or assist in the placement of any unrelated minor, a child not related to them, in other words, for care in a foster home, therapeutic foster home, or adoptive home. So it's broad.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the amendment, Senator Torres, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, this amendment was proffered simply because of the comments made by our legal review, where they noted that in their comments to please see the track changes attached to their version for more detailed stylistic suggestions. Many of these suggestions are superfluous. They don't break the bill. They can help the bill. But I did it in an abundance of graciousness. If there was any concern by the review that perhaps this might be a better way to say it, then that's where I went. I just want to add that, you know, the discussion tonight is rather heated. There are a lot of misrepresentations and misinformation, one of which is the licensing. Bethany Taylor from Harvest House testified and informed our office that she is in fact not licensed. Harvest House is not licensed, and so she welcomed this concept of a license. But, Madam Chair, at this point, because this amendment really was superfluous, and I mentioned that, it's not a break to my bill. It doesn't hurt my bill to not have it. It could perhaps help it, but it doesn't hurt it. The bill is strong and sound as it is. And so with that, in the interest of trying to keep some peace and civility in this late evening hour, I withdraw the amendment to the bill.
On the motion to withdraw the amendment, any objection? Motion passes. We have one more amendment in the file. Senator Titlegy, you are recognized. We're now on the Titlegy amendment.
Sijus Masi, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, my amendment, if you give me 1 minute to set up here. Okay, Madam Chair, thank you for that minute. My amendment is on line 11, page 4. And what it does, it strikes out the section on letter D, section 2, letter D of the bill. No rule shall be effective until after a legislature in Guam, by the passage of a bill into law, provides, disproves, or amends any rule. Madam Chair, the reason why I'm striking this out is because when we talk about interim rules and regulations, we talk about, the agency creating these interim rules and regs. We also give the authority to the department in this bill to create them and not have to go through the AAA process in creating interim rules and regs. If you read it from the beginning, it says public health and social services interim rules shall be exempt from the provisions of the Administrative Adjudication Act, provided that such rules shall receive at least one public hearing by the Legislative Committee with subject matter jurisdiction in legislature in Guam, pursuant to open government law, to ensure transparency, permit public participation therein, and to provide a method of making rules readily accessible to the public. Then it says, no rule shall be effected until after a legislature in Guam, by the passage of a bill into law, approves, disapproves, or amends any rules. Now, that last sentence, Madam Chair, basically is acting like this is the administrative rules and regs itself, when interim rules usually doesn't have the legislature to approve it. Hence the word interim rules, until that they can go through the adjudication process. But now, we're requiring interim rules that are so desperately needed today because there is an agency on this island that is already advertising. And from what I heard from an individual at Public Health, they're already charging application fees in their company. So what we're doing here is just striking that section out and allow Public Health to create these interim rules and regulations, do their public hearing, and move forward with that. That's all I'm asking here. We don't need another layer of bureaucracy for interim rules and regulations because it's interim rules. So that's what this amendment is doing. It's striking out that section that requires these rules to come to the legislature in a bill format to be approved or disapproved. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titlegy. On the amendment, there's been an objection. On the amendment, there's been an objection. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion fails. That is all we have for amendments.
I'd like to offer my amendment that I was making to the amendment as an amendment to the bill. So
Okay.
everyone already has a copy of it. And again, this amendment would be to change this bill so that prior to the issuance of the interim rules and regulations, no adoption agency can act, and that they must be licensed by the Guam Department of Public Health and Social Services. And that we remove the need for foster homes and therapeutic foster homes to be included in this legislation, as they are already licensed and regulated and monitored by the Department of Public Health. And that's why, again, I am so that I object to these proceedings without the Department of Public Health and Social Services. First, it doesn't get referred, the bill doesn't get referred to the Committee on Health with jurisdiction over public health, who's going to implement these rules and regulations, implement adoption agency monitoring, who does the foster placements right now pursuant to rules and regulations and licensing. They're not here. That's solely the topic of our discussion. But it's like we want to purposely act in the dark here. I can't see the rationale behind that. It should have been more important that public health be here for these proceedings as opposed to be excluded when we are going to talk about nothing but rules and regulations under public health and which ones are needed, which ones are not, which ones are urgent, which are the licensing of adoption agencies who are acting right now without rules and regs, without licensing by public health, without public health's ability to monitor them. So those are the facts. So I'm asking again that we move forward in good faith and that we do what we came here to do, and that is if we are going to require, we're going to say it's so important to pass interim rules and regs and that they be licensed, then let's make sure that we pass a bill that does that. So I'm proposing this amendment. And I'm asking that legal be authorized to make technical changes to conform with the statute as, to the bill. That's my amendment, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Speaker Terlahi. On the amendment, there's been an objection. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by raising your hand.
Excuse me, Madam
Senator
Chair.
San Augustine?
I have a question. Maybe, I don't know if it's a point of order or not. You know, we received all hard copies, and I only saw 2 amendments. There was an amendment to an amendment. And if there's something else floating out there, if it ain't in writing, then it doesn't exist.
No.
Not unless, you know,
Yes.
it exists now.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. What we are acting on now is what was previously the amendment to the amendment.
And it failed.
It did fail. This is being proffered as a standalone amendment. So you all have a copy already. It is the TMT Amendment L5P3.
What I don't understand, Madam Chair, is you had an amendment, you have an amendment to an amendment, it failed. Then we went back to the amendment, and the amendment was withdrawn. Now you're bringing back an amendment that was amended. Something don't sound, maybe you need to take a quick recess and get legal, because I don't see how this becomes valid. That's all I'm asking. If it's valid, then we can continue on the discussion. But I don't believe, there's something that don't even sound right.
There's no issue. I could make a copy and pass it out again. Is that what we want to do? Take another recess to do that?
Madam Chair, I'm just asking for clarification. I don't need no extra copy. I got the same copy. I'm only making clarification of what happened already earlier.
Yes, thank
If
you,
we're gonna come
Senator
with
San
every excuse,
Augustine.
go
I
ahead.
will clarify. This was previously an amendment to the amendment that failed. That amendment was withdrawn. We had this copy already in our file. The Speaker has introduced it as a standalone amendment now. So there has been an objection on the amendment. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Amendment fails. That's all we have for amendments now. Senator Torres, you may close.
Madam Speaker, I just want to take this time to thank my co-sponsors for their support of this bill. I also want to recognize all of our non-governmental partners and volunteers who work night and day to find safe and loving homes for each of Guam's children. The Bureau of Social Services is one agency, but it requires many dedicated entities, nonprofits, and individuals working together to protect our children and to strengthen our families. And with that, I just want to end and thank everyone for the discussion on and their consideration of Bill 206. Siduos Masi.
Siduos Masi, Senator Torres.
I move that Bill 206-36LS be moved to the third reading voting file.
On the motion,
Wait, objection. We haven't risen from the committee of the whole.
sorry, can you amend your motion to give a recommendation to be placed on the third reading file since we remain in the committee of the whole?
Yes, certainly. I overlooked that we have one more bill to go. So, Madam Chair, I make a motion that, with the recommendation that when we rise out of the committee of the whole, that Bill 206-36LS be placed in the third reading file, third reading voting file.
Thank you. Are there any objections?
Objection.
There's been an objection. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. We are now on Bill number 66-36.
Objection, I think that bill was passed on file. It's at the bottom of our agenda.
It was set aside previously in the committee of the whole, and so we have, I will recognize Senator Moylan at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Objection, Madam Chair, if we could get clarification from the clerk as to this bill was placed to the bottom of the agenda.
I'll entertain a motion from Senator Moylan to bring the bill back into the agenda now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. I move to accept Bill number 6636 Core as amended by the Committee on Economic Development, Agriculture, Power,
Objection.
and Energy.
Objection, we're not on Bill 66, Madam Chair.
Senator Moylan, if you can amend your motion for us to entertain bill number 66-36 at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we accept, one more time. Repeat that, please.
Motion to discuss bill number 66.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Motion to discuss Bill 66 Core as amended by Committee on Economic Development and Agriculture, Power, and Energy Utilities and the Arts, and substituted in the committee as a whole, as introduced by myself and by Speaker Tina Rose Munoz Barnes, which is an act to...
Objection, Madam Chair. I think we need a notwithstanding motion to pass the bill that's currently, that we're on, right, we should be on right now, to pass that bill on file and entertain this one instead. Otherwise, no, the bill that we're supposed to be on after 206.
Please include a notwithstanding in your amendment, Senator Moylan.
Notwithstanding.
Okay. Notwithstanding the rules, there has been a motion to discuss bill number 66-36 as amended and further substituted. Are there any objections? May proceed, Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this amended version, as substituted in committee, removes any mention of renovation of the hotel rooms. This goes back to...
One moment, Senator Moylan. We need a motion to accept the latest amended version that you have sent into the clerks. So a motion to accept the latest amended version as substituted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to accept the latest version of Bill number 6636 Core as amended by the Committee on Economic Development, Agriculture, Power, and Energy Utilities and the Arts, and substituted in the committee as a whole.
On the motion to accept, motion passes. Senator Moylan, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. The version we are looking at now removes any mention of the renovation part of the QC. It goes back to what was introduced with the public hearing, except minusing the two sections that discuss the QC. It's removed completely. As we had discussed previously, for the concern about the qualifying, about the fiscal note, since it regarded renovations. We are no longer talking about renovations. So basically this bill, this one we are looking at now, adjusts or extends the QC for the additional 1,600 hotel rooms. It did also take the recommendation from GITA to move the extension for another 10 years. Okay. As well as, so with the 10 years, the QC will expire on December 31st of 2031, which was the recommendation of GITA in the public hearing, the original public hearing. Also, it removed the China visa waiver on the bill 2, which was also the recommendation by Gita at the public hearing. So I believe this would help my colleagues move this bill forward since it has removed the renovations and is basically an extension of the qualifying certificate for the additional 1,600 rooms, which, by the way, of course, we understand Sabaki Towers has removed about 400 of that. So thank you, Madam Chair. Looking forward to any questions.
Thank you very much, Senator Moylan. We'll take a moment's recess. We are back from recess. Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Madam Chair, move to recess until tomorrow, 9 o'clock.
There's been a motion to recess until 9 o'clock. And any objections? We are in recess.